The email arrived on a gray November afternoon, catching Rebecca off guard as she reviewed quarterly reports in her corner office. The subject line read simply, "Christmas at the Manor. You're invited." She recognized Marcus's email address immediately, though they hadn't communicated directly in nearly 3 years, not since their divorce was finalized. Her finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. The message was brief, almost perfunctory, inviting her to the annual Christmas gathering at his family's estate, the same event she'd attended dutifully for 5 years during their marriage. It struck her as odd, even suspicious. Marcus wasn't the forgiving type, and their separation had been anything but amicable. His final words to her in the courtroom still echoed in her memory. "You'll regret choosing your career over family." Rebecca leaned back in her leather chair, studying the email for hidden meanings. Marcus had remarried within a year of their divorce to someone he claimed was everything Rebecca wasn't: domestic, nurturing, eager to start a family. The wedding announcement had reached her through mutual friends, along with whispered reports that his new wife, Jennifer, was already pregnant. Rebecca had sent a polite congratulations card and moved on with her life, or at least tried to. The truth was, their divorce had been devastating. Marcus had presented her with an ultimatum: give up her position as chief financial officer and focus on having children, or end the marriage. She'd chosen her career, not because she didn't want children, but because she refused to be controlled, to have her dreams diminished by someone who claimed to love her. Now, staring at his invitation, Rebecca felt the old wounds throb. Why would Marcus want her there? His mother had made it clear during the divorce proceedings that Rebecca was no longer considered family, that her inability to prioritize childbearing had been a personal affront. The Thornton family Christmas was a lavish affair, a display of wealth and status where multiple generations gathered to showcase their perfect lives. Rebecca had always felt slightly out of place, even when she was married to Marcus, sensing that she was being evaluated and found wanting. She almost deleted the email then, almost let it disappear into the digital void where it belonged. But something stopped her. Perhaps pride, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the tiny voice in her head that whispered she had nothing to hide or be ashamed of anymore. Her life had transformed dramatically in the 3 years since the divorce. She'd received 2 major promotions, traveled to 14 countries for business, and most importantly, she'd found genuine happiness on her own terms. If Marcus wanted to extend an olive branch, however belatedly, maybe she could afford to be gracious. Or maybe, she thought with a wry smile, she could show up and prove that she'd not only survived without him but thrived. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody except her closest friends and family knew, was that Rebecca's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. 18 months ago, exhausted from endless work travel and feeling an inexplicable emptiness despite her professional success, she'd made an impulsive decision. During a business trip to California, she'd walked past a fertility clinic and, on a whim, walked inside. The decision to pursue single motherhood through IVF had crystallized in that moment. She was financially secure, emotionally ready, and tired of waiting for the perfect circumstances that might never arrive. If Marcus had taught her anything, it was that she didn't need anyone's permission to build the life she wanted. The IVF process had been more challenging than she'd anticipated, both physically and emotionally. The hormone treatments left her exhausted and emotional, the waiting periods felt interminable, and the first transfer had failed, leaving her devastated in ways she hadn't prepared for. But Rebecca had learned resilience during her marriage and subsequent divorce. She'd tried again, opting for a second transfer with 2 embryos to improve her chances. Her doctor had counseled her about the possibility of twins, and she'd accepted that risk willingly, already envisioning how she'd manage 2 babies alongside her career. She'd begun researching nanny services and childcare facilities, planning with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to corporate mergers. The ultrasound at 8 weeks had been routine, or so she'd thought. The technician had been quiet for longer than seemed normal, moving the wand across Rebecca's abdomen with increasing focus. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. "I'm seeing multiple heartbeats. Let me get the doctor." Rebecca's own heart had begun pounding. Twins, she'd thought. It's twins. But when the doctor arrived and studied the screen, her expression had been a mixture of professional composure and barely concealed amazement. "Miss Chun," she'd said slowly, "you're carrying quadruplets. For healthy, developing babies." The room had seemed to tilt sideways. Rebecca had stammered questions about how this was possible, and the doctor explained that sometimes embryos split naturally, that while rare, it wasn't unheard of when transferring multiple embryos. The months that followed had been a whirlwind of medical appointments, preparations, and careful secrecy. Rebecca had taken a temporary leave from work, claiming she needed time to focus on a special project, which wasn't entirely untrue. The special project just happened to be growing 4 human beings. She'd given birth at 33 weeks, standard for quadruplet pregnancies, and spent 6 weeks watching her 4 tiny babies, 2 boys and 2 girls, grow stronger in the NICU. She'd named them carefully: Alexander, Benjamin, Charlotte, and Daniela, each name chosen for its strength and meaning. Now, at 6 months old, they were healthy, thriving, and the absolute center of her universe. She'd returned to work part-time with an arrangement that allowed her to work primarily from home, supported by 2 excellent nannies who rotated shifts. Her life was chaotic, exhausting, and more fulfilling than anything she'd experienced in her previous existence. Rebecca sat with Marcus's email for 3 days before responding. During those 72 hours, she nursed babies, changed diapers, reviewed financial projections during stolen moments of peace, and contemplated the sweet irony of the situation. Marcus had divorced her because she couldn't, or wouldn't, give him children. He'd remarried specifically to start the family he claimed to desperately want. And now she had 4 children, a ready-made family that had materialized without him, without his timeline, without his control. The thought of his face when he discovered the truth filled her with an admittedly petty, but undeniably satisfying sense of vindication. She wasn't proud of the feeling, but she was human enough to acknowledge it. On the 4th day, during a rare moment when all 4 babies were napping simultaneously, Rebecca called her best friend, Maya. "He invited me to Christmas," she said without preamble. Maya, who'd been her rock through the divorce and the surprise quadruplet pregnancy, immediately understood. "Marcus? That's bold. Or stupid. Probably both." Rebecca explained her suspicions, how the invitation felt less like genuine reconciliation and more like a setup, an opportunity for Marcus to parade his new family while subtly reminding her of what she'd lost. Maya listened quietly, then said, "So show him what you've gained. Bring the quad squad. Let him choke on his assumptions." Rebecca laughed at the irreverent nickname Maya had coined for the babies, but the suggestion took root. The more Rebecca considered it, the more appealing the idea became. She wasn't going to hide her children or her life. If Marcus had invited her genuinely, perhaps as a gesture of maturity and closure, then he'd be happy to see she'd found her own path to parenthood. If, as she suspected, he'd invited her to gloat or humiliate her, then her arrival with 4 babies would turn his petty scheme on its head. She wouldn't be cruel about it. She'd simply exist, authentically and unapologetically, as the successful, happy mother she'd become. The babies were too young to understand the significance, but someday, she'd tell them this story, how their mother had refused to be diminished by someone else's narrow vision of what her life should look like. Rebecca composed her response carefully, keeping it brief and gracious. "Thank you for the invitation. I'd be delighted to attend. I'll be bringing guests. I hope that's acceptable." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then immediately began planning logistics. Taking 4 6-month-old babies to a formal Christmas gathering would require military-level organization. She'd need to coordinate with her nannies, pack supplies for every contingency, and prepare herself emotionally for whatever reaction awaited. But Rebecca had faced down hostile boardrooms and navigated complex international negotiations. She could certainly handle one Christmas dinner with her ex-husband's family, especially with her 4 perfect reasons to hold her head high nestled in her arms. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of feeding schedules, sleep deprivation, and meticulous planning. Rebecca arranged for both of her nannies, Sophia and Grace, to accompany her to the Thornton estate, understanding that managing 4 infants at a social gathering would be impossible alone. She purchased matching outfits for the babies, elegant velvet ensembles in deep forest green and burgundy that would photograph beautifully against the Thornton Manor's traditional Christmas decorations. For herself, she selected a sophisticated burgundy dress that complemented her post-baby figure without trying to hide it. She'd earned every curve, every stretch mark, and she felt no shame about her body's transformation. Marcus's response to her email had been brief. "Of course. Looking forward to seeing you." She'd analyzed those 6 words obsessively, searching for hidden meaning, but they revealed nothing. Either he genuinely had no idea what guests meant, or he was playing his cards close to his chest. Rebecca suspected the latter. Marcus had always been strategic, thinking 3 moves ahead in every interaction. That quality had served him well in his legal career, but had made him exhausting to live with. She remembered how he'd approached their relationship like a case to be won, complete with arguments, evidence, and closing statements. The irony that he'd ultimately lost her through that same approach had apparently escaped him. As Christmas approached, Rebecca found herself surprisingly calm. The old anxiety she'd felt around Marcus had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence born from surviving the worst he could do to her and emerging stronger. She'd grieved the loss of their marriage, yes, but she'd also discovered parts of herself that had been suppressed during their years together. The Rebecca who had apologized constantly for her ambition, who had second-guessed her choices, who had tried to contort herself into someone more acceptable to his family, that woman no longer existed. In her place was someone who had walked through fire and found not ashes but gold. Maya came over the night before Christmas Eve to help Rebecca do a trial run of packing the diaper bags, car seats, and portable cribs. "You know," Maya said, folding tiny socks, "you don't have to do this. You don't owe Marcus anything, certainly not the satisfaction of seeing you perform." Rebecca considered this, watching Alexander grab his toes while Charlotte babbled contentedly nearby. "I'm not doing it for him," she said finally. "I'm doing it for me. I spent 5 years of my marriage feeling inadequate, feeling like I was failing some invisible test. I want to walk into that house and feel absolutely nothing. No shame, no regret, no wish that things had been different. Just peace with who I am and the choices I've made. If Marcus has a problem with that, it's his problem, not mine." The Thornton estate looked exactly as Rebecca remembered, a sprawling stone manor decorated with tasteful white lights, evergreen wreaths on every window, and a massive Christmas tree visible through the front windows. As she pulled up the circular driveway in her SUV, followed by Sophia and Grace in a second vehicle with most of the baby supplies, Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. This was it. There was no turning back now, not that she wanted to. She'd come too far, become too much herself, to retreat now. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, touched up her lipstick, and stepped out into the cold December evening. The front door opened before she could knock, and Marcus's mother, Patricia, stood framed in the doorway. The older woman's welcoming smile froze when she saw Sophia emerging from the second car with a baby carrier. Then Grace appeared with another carrier. Then Rebecca opened the back door of her SUV and began unbuckling Charlotte from her car seat. Patricia's face cycled through confusion, shock, and finally something that might have been understanding. "Rebecca," she said carefully, "how lovely to see you. And you've brought children?" Her voice rose slightly on the last word, making it almost a question. "My children, yes," Rebecca said calmly, settling Charlotte more securely on her hip as Alexander began to fuss in his carrier. "I hope the invitation extended to them as well. Quadruplets don't travel well separately." She smiled pleasantly, watching Patricia process this information. To her credit, Marcus's mother recovered quickly, years of social breeding taking over. Of course. Please, come in. Let me help with my goodness, 4? You have 4 babies?" Rebecca nodded, moving past her into the familiar entryway. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, and Christmas music played softly from hidden speakers. Everything was exactly as it had always been, except Rebecca was entirely different. The great room fell silent when she entered. 20 or so family members, drinks in hand, turned to stare. Rebecca scanned the crowd quickly, finding Marcus immediately. He stood by the fireplace, a glass of bourbon in one hand, his other arm around a petite blonde woman who must be Jennifer. His face had gone completely white, his expression shifting from casual confidence to absolute shock in the space of a heartbeat. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Benjamin let out a loud, cheerful babble, breaking the spell. Marcus's father, Richard, recovered first, moving forward with his characteristic booming voice. "Rebecca, what a surprise. And who do we have here?" He peered at the babies with genuine curiosity, and Rebecca felt a rush of gratitude for his social grace, even if it was purely performative. "This is Alexander, Benjamin, Charlotte, and Daniela," Rebecca said, gesturing to each baby in turn. "They're 6 months old today, actually. Perfect timing for a Christmas celebration." She kept her voice light, friendly, as though she couldn't feel the weight of dozens of stares, as though she couldn't see Marcus's jaw clenching, as though she couldn't sense the whispers already beginning. Jennifer had detached herself from Marcus's side and was staring at Rebecca with an expression that mingled confusion with something that looked uncomfortably like pity. Pity. For Rebecca. The irony was almost too much. Marcus found his voice finally, though it came out strangled. "Rebecca. This is unexpected. You didn't mention." He trailed off, apparently unable to complete the sentence. Rebecca met his gaze evenly, refusing to look away first. "You invited me to Christmas," she said simply. "I accepted. Did you want me to provide a detailed family roster in advance?" The barb was subtle, but landed. Around them, family members began finding their voices, moving forward to coo over the babies, to ask questions, to fill the awkward silence with the social niceties that lubricated such gatherings. Sophia and Grace had positioned themselves strategically near Rebecca, ready to assist, but allowing her to maintain center stage. Patricia had disappeared, presumably to arrange additional seating and prepare for 4 unexpected tiny guests. Marcus's younger sister, Emma, who had always been kind to Rebecca during the marriage, approached with tears in her eyes. "They're beautiful," she whispered, stroking Charlotte's soft hair. "I'm so happy for you, Rebecca. You look radiant." Rebecca felt unexpected emotions swell in her chest. She'd prepared for confrontation, for awkwardness, even for cruelty, but not for genuine warmth from someone she'd assumed would side entirely with Marcus. As the evening progressed, Rebecca found herself relaxing into the gathering. The babies, perhaps sensing her calm, were on their best behavior. Alexander charmed everyone with his gummy smiles. Benjamin displayed impressive lung capacity during a diaper change. Charlotte clutched a velvet Christmas stocking and refused to let go, and Daniela fell asleep in the arms of Marcus's elderly aunt, who declared her an absolute angel. Rebecca moved through the room, accepting congratulations, deflecting questions about the baby's father with practiced vagueness. "A donor. I decided to do this on my own," and generally conducting herself with the poise of someone who had absolutely nothing to apologize for. Marcus kept his distance, nursing his bourbon and watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Jennifer had rallied after her initial shock, playing the gracious hostess, though Rebecca noticed her hand drifting to her own slightly rounded stomach more than once. So the rumors were true. She was pregnant. Rebecca felt no jealousy, only a distant wish that the woman would find more happiness with Marcus than Rebecca had. When dinner was announced and everyone moved toward the formal dining room, Marcus finally approached. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Privately?" Rebecca glanced at her babies, all currently in the capable hands of her nannies or various family members. 5 minutes, she agreed, following him into his father's study. The study was exactly as Rebecca remembered: dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, the faint smell of cigar smoke that never quite dissipated. Marcus closed the door and leaned against it, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she recognized from countless arguments during their marriage. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice raw. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Tell you what, exactly? That I'd moved on with my life? That I'd found happiness?" We're divorced, Marcus. I don't owe you updates on my personal decisions. He flinched at that, then seemed to gather himself. This whole thing, inviting you here, it wasn't what you think. Rebecca crossed her arms, waiting. She'd learned during their marriage that silence was often more powerful than words, that Marcus would fill the quiet spaces with truth if she just waited long enough. Jennifer thought it would be a nice gesture. He continued finally. A way to show there were no hard feelings, that we'd all moved on maturely. She's been feeling guilty about how quickly we got together after the divorce, and she suggested inviting you as a way to, I don't know, make peace? He laughed bitterly. I told her it was a bad idea, but she insisted. Said it would make her feel better about everything. Rebecca absorbed this information, recalibrating her assumptions. So it hadn't been Marcus's idea to humiliate her, it had been Jennifer's attempt at salving her conscience. Somehow that made it worse, or at least more complicated. And you agreed because, she prompted. Marcus met her eyes finally, and she saw something there she'd rarely witnessed during their marriage, vulnerability. Because she's right. I've been carrying around anger and resentment for 3 years, and it's exhausting. I wanted to prove to myself that I could see you and feel nothing, that you hadn't ruined my ability to move forward. He paused, then added quietly, clearly, I was wrong on multiple fronts. I didn't ruin anything, Marcus, Rebecca said, keeping her voice gentle but firm. We wanted different things. I wasn't willing to sacrifice my entire identity to fit into your vision of what a wife should be, and you weren't willing to accept me as I was. That's not anyone's fault. It's just incompatibility. She moved to the window, looking out at the snow beginning to fall. I won't apologize for having children on my own timeline, in my own way. And I won't pretend I'm sorry our marriage ended. I'm not. It was painful, yes, but it led me to exactly where I needed to be. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more honest than she'd heard it in years. They're beautiful, Rebecca. Your children. And you look happy, genuinely happy, in a way I don't think you ever were with me. Rebecca turned to face him, seeing not her ex-husband, but simply another human being trying to navigate the messy reality of life. I am happy, she confirmed. I hope you are too, Marcus. I hope Jennifer and your baby bring you joy. I mean that sincerely. Something in him seemed to break then, the rigid posture softening. I'm sorry, he said. For the ultimatum, for making you feel like you had to choose, for not seeing that I was trying to control you instead of love you. You deserved better. Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Patricia had somehow manifested high chairs seemingly from thin air, and the babies were positioned around the table like tiny royalty, each attended by someone eager to help. Rebecca found herself seated between Emma and Jennifer, a positioning that might have been awkward, but instead felt oddly comfortable. Jennifer, it turned out, was far more interesting than Rebecca had given her credit for. She was a pediatric nurse, currently working part-time while preparing for her own baby's arrival, and she spoke intelligently about childhood development and modern parenting challenges. I have to admit, Jennifer said quietly during the main course, while Alexander grabbed at her napkin, I was terrified to meet you. Marcus spoke about you so rarely, but when he did, it was clear you cast a long shadow. I felt like I was competing with a ghost. Rebecca appreciated the honesty. You're not competing with anyone, she said. Marcus and I were wrong for each other. That doesn't diminish what you two have built. Jennifer smiled gratefully, then hesitated before asking, was the invitation terrible? Patricia said, you probably thought we were trying to humiliate you, and now I'm mortified. I genuinely just wanted to extend an olive branch, but I realize how it must have looked. Rebecca considered this, watching Daniela gum a piece of soft bread. Honestly, I did suspect ulterior motives initially. But I came anyway because I've reached a point where I don't need anyone else's approval to feel good about my life. If you've been trying to hurt me, it wouldn't have worked. I'm bulletproof now, Quadruplets will do that to you. They both laughed, and Rebecca felt an unexpected kinship with this woman who'd stepped into her former life. Jennifer leaned in conspiratorially. Can I ask something potentially rude? Rebecca nodded. How are you managing with 4? I'm terrified about handling one, and you make it look, well, not easy, but possible. They spent the rest of dinner discussing the logistics of multiple babies, the best strategies for sleep training, the necessity of accepting help, and the importance of letting perfectionism go. Around them, conversation flowed more naturally than Rebecca would have believed possible an hour earlier. Marcus's family, whatever their initial shock, had rallied around the babies with enthusiasm. Alexander was being passed around like a particularly adorable football. Charlotte had been claimed by Emma. Benjamin was demonstrating his impressive vocal range for Marcus's father, and Daniela remained contentedly asleep despite the chaos. It was, Rebecca realized with some surprise, actually nice. After dinner, as coffee and dessert were served in the great room, Marcus's mother pulled Rebecca aside. "I owe you an apology," Patricia said without preamble. "During the divorce, I took Marcus's side without question. I made assumptions about your priorities and your character that were unfair and uninformed. Seeing you tonight, seeing the life you've built, I realize how wrong I was." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. Patricia's approval had always mattered more than she wanted to admit, perhaps because she'd lost her own mother young and had longed for that maternal connection. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." Rebecca had accepted Patricia's unexpected invitation to stay the night rather than drive home with 4 tired babies. The manor had plenty of guest rooms, and Sophia and Grace had efficiently set up portable cribs and established a night routine. As Rebecca lay in the familiar guest room she'd stayed in countless times during her marriage, listening to the soft breathing of her 4 sleeping children, she felt an unexpected sense of closure. The ghost of her past had been confronted and found to be just that, a ghost, with no power over her present reality. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight glinting off fresh snow. The babies woke in stages, starting with Benjamin's hungry cry at 6 a.m., followed by the others in quick succession. By the time Rebecca had managed to feed all 4 and change diapers, she heard movement throughout the house. The Thornton family was waking to Christmas. She dressed the babies in their Christmas outfits, took a moment to make herself presentable, and headed downstairs to find the great room transformed into a winter wonderland, the massive tree surrounded by carefully wrapped presents. To her shock, she found several presents labeled with her babies' names. Patricia appeared beside her, looking almost embarrassed. "I took the liberty last night," she explained. "Called in a few favors to the all-night shopping services. I hope you don't mind. I just couldn't bear the thought of them being here on Christmas with nothing under the tree." Rebecca's throat tightened with emotion. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I know," Patricia replied. "But I wanted to. Consider it an apology gift, or perhaps a way of acknowledging that you're still family, even if the connections have changed." The morning unfolded with unexpected joy. The babies were too young to understand presents, but delighted in the wrapping paper, which became an instant hit. Alexander's face when he crinkled his first sheet of shiny paper was captured by at least 5 different phones, instantly becoming the group's favorite photo. Marcus joined them eventually, holding his own phone and clearly documenting the morning for Jennifer, who was resting upstairs with morning sickness. He seemed different today, softer, more genuine, the defensive anger that had characterized their last interactions completely absent. As the morning progressed and the extended family began arriving for Christmas brunch, Rebecca found herself telling and retelling the story of the Quadruplets. Each time, it became easier, more natural, less like justifying her choices, and more like simply sharing her life. She spoke about the decision to pursue single motherhood, the shock of discovering she was carrying 4 babies, the challenges and unexpected joys of her new reality. The responses varied. Some expressed admiration, others concern about how she managed, a few made uncomfortable jokes, but nobody questioned her right to make these choices, and that felt like progress. As Rebecca packed up her small army of baby supplies on Christmas afternoon, preparing for the drive home, she felt profoundly different from the woman who had arrived 24 hours earlier. The experience hadn't gone as she'd expected. It had been better, more healing, more complete. Marcus appeared as she was loading the last bag into her SUV, his hands shoved in his pockets, against the cold. "Rebecca," he said. "Thank you for coming. I know it couldn't have been easy, especially not knowing what to expect." She smiled, adjusting Charlotte's car seat strap. "It was good," she said honestly. "Necessary, maybe. We both needed to see that we'd survived each other and built lives we're proud of." "Can I say something?" Marcus asked. Rebecca nodded, bracing herself for one final confrontation. But what came was unexpected. "You're going to be an amazing mother," he said. "You already are. And I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you had to choose between ambition and family. Watching you with them yesterday, you figured out how to have both. I don't know how you do it, but I'm genuinely in awe." Rebecca felt tears threaten for the second time in 12 hours. "Thank you," she managed. "That means a lot, truly. And Marcus? I hope fatherhood brings you everything you're hoping for. I mean it." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who had once promised forever and had found different forevers instead. "Will you stay in touch?" Marcus asked finally. "I'd like the kids to know each other, maybe. No pressure, but an open door if you want it." Rebecca considered this, looking at Alexander through the car window. He was already half asleep, his little fist clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. "Let's take it slow," she said. "But yes, I'm open to that. Family can take a lot of different forms. Maybe ours is just more creative than most." Marcus laughed, the sound genuine and warm. That's one way to put it. As Rebecca drove away from the Thornton estate, for sleeping babies secured in the back of her SUV, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with her past. The woman she'd been during her marriage wasn't someone to regret or reject. She'd been doing her best with the understanding she had at the time. The divorce, as painful as it had been, had cracked her open in ways that allowed her to grow into someone stronger, more authentic, more completely herself. The quadruplets weren't a spite pregnancy or a way to prove Marcus wrong. They were simply the family she'd created on her terms, in her timing, through her choices. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Marcus had invited his childless ex-wife to Christmas, perhaps hoping to showcase his own impending fatherhood, perhaps genuinely trying to make peace, perhaps some combination of both. Instead, he'd been confronted with the reality that Rebecca had moved so far beyond their shared past that she'd literally created 4 new lives. But more importantly, Rebecca had confronted her own ghosts and discovered they had no power anymore. The approval she'd once craved from Marcus and his family was revealed as unnecessary. She was enough, exactly as she was, with her messy, chaotic, beautiful life. As Christmas lights began twinkling on in houses along the highway, Rebecca glanced in the rearview mirror at her 4 sleeping miracles. "Merry Christmas, my loves," she whispered. "Thank you for making me brave enough to show up exactly as I am." Benjamin stirred slightly, as if in response, then settled back into sleep. Rebecca smiled, turned up the music, and drove toward home, toward her future, toward all the messy, exhausting, perfect days that lay ahead. She'd walked into her ex-husband's house expecting confrontation and had found closure instead. More than that, she discovered that the best revenge wasn't showing up with quadruplets. It was showing up as someone who no longer needed revenge at all.